I remain your moderator, Grace Effiom, and I'm the head of enterprise here at Lendsqr. And with me, I have two special guests that will be taking up this conversation today. And we're all going to be talking about how to be a successful lender without cutting corners. I have with me Mr. Abayomi Sule, who is the founder of Paycient Finance. I also have Mr. Babatunde Irukera, who is also the former executive vice chairman of FCCPC. They will give us further introduction about themselves, and then you get to know them better as the conversation continues.
Good morning, everyone, and good morning to Mr. Irukera as well.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Nice to meet you. So I'm just going to hand over the floor to everybody, and then to you, Mr. Abayomi, and then you're going to take up the conversation from here.
Sounds good, Grace, and you can drop the Mr. Just call me Yomi as you normally do.
No problem.
Don't fuck the formality. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Over to you, sir. Over to you, Yomi.
All right. Thanks a lot. Good morning, Mr. Irukera. It's a pleasure to have you. I did
Just
say I was
drop
also...
the Mr. You can call me Tunde too.
Sounds good. Sounds good. I like that. And I told you that my preference was to do that as well, but I just thought let's start and then you tell me which one you prefer. Thank you, Tunde. I had told you I was going to start off by mentioning one or two areas you and I are connected. But first, let me thank everyone who has made it to this webinar. I'm sure they're here not because of me, but because of Tunde or Mr. Irukera, as we all know him. So thank you for joining, and for joining on time in particular. I'm sure it's going to be an exciting conversation. Yeah, so Tunde, you don't know this, but I'm also from Kogi State, also from your senatorial district, and I'm from Ijumu local government, which I believe is where your wife is from. I think your wife and my mom are from the same hometown. Not only that, I went to FGCI. I was in schoolhouse. So I don't know which house you were, because I was in that secondary school in 1989. I'm sure you probably had left before then.
I left 1985.
Okay, sounds good. So yeah, so we're connected by geography and educational background. I did a bit of research. I also understand that you started off at the University of Ilorin, but you had to leave for OAU to finish your law degree. I completed my medical education at University of Ilorin. So we're connected, I think, in those regards. Maybe also when we're done with the Q&A, I will speak to the value of your legacy at FCCPC and how that impacted me personally. But before we go into that, let's start off with the questions. Now, I know you started off as DG of CPC, as it was then known. Then at some point, it became FCCPC. I also know that before then, nobody heard a lot about CPC until you took over. What changed? What approach did you have to change management at CPC and FCCPC? Was it revolutionary or evolutionary? I say this because some of us on this call, we're running fintechs. At some point in time, we might consider acquisitions, and well, not even just acquisitions, even just getting our products into the market involves a lot of change management, and we might be able to learn one or two things from your experience, especially as government still remains the biggest market or buyer or purchaser or spender in this economy. So we'll have to work with government. Are there any takeaways you can share from your transformational time at CPC/FCCPC? Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good morning to everybody, and thanks for the invite again. And thanks for that early introduction and essentially a quick colonoscopy that literally tells everything about me. But yes, I think you've really identified what it was. You needed to be revolutionary, and you also needed to evolve. There were two things for me, and that was that for some reason, we couldn't really, as a nation, determine the real purpose of what the CPC was. And so finding purpose is very fundamental to how far you're going to go, in the sense that It is purpose that drives strategy, right? And strategy will drive energy. And so for me, I looked at it and I said, look, this CPC is this small backwater agency whose total annual budget was so in the region of about ₦1 billion, of which 560 million of that was payroll for, a quarter of, for 240 people, a quarter of 1,000 people. And when I took over, I went back to the State House to have a conversation with the senior people in government and say, I think there's been a mistake. And the question was, why? Well, I said, well, I think that, the many letters in all these agencies in the country has confused everybody. I think the DG there really is missing one letter. And that they said, what letter do you think is missing? I think there should be an M somewhere, not just this DG. There should be an M in the title of the executive who goes to this place. Secondly, I think that the CPC, the number of C's and the P, and just how many C's and P's we had in the country at the time, ICPC, FCC, NNPC, and all of that was confusing. That I'm pretty certain that what they wanted to do was not BGCPC, but for the errors, what they wanted to send me to was GMD NNPC. And the reason why I made that joke was that surely, whatever my offense, I've done youth corps, I'm sitting down quietly in Lagos. Why would you bring me to this agency? Not to the role, but to the agency. And one of the very senior people I was meeting with said, look, we appointed you based on demonstrated interest. You have a record of interest in this consumer issues, so it's time. It's time. You've also participated in, at that time, about a decade and a half of trying to promulgate the composite competition regulatory framework in Nigeria. And so now you won't be able to complain about anything. You've tried from outside, you've struggled, you've complained about what isn't working. So now it's time for you to contribute that. And so I said, okay, well, I would come back for a second conversation. And when I went back for a second conversation, I went with some data. I had a meeting. This meeting was at the time, the topmost people in government, about 3 ministers and 2 other people who were senior to a minister, and 1 person who was in charge of the budget office. And I took a poll of all of them in that meeting, and I asked, what do you consider the greatest asset of this country? Every one of them said, well, we think the people, the market, that's what's most attractive about the country. And so I brought out a poll result that I had conducted before meeting with them, where I had polled about 30 people and added the 6 people to it, and it became 36 people. And the result from the 36 was that I think 33 said exactly the same thing, that the people, the market. 1 person said mineral resources. I think 2 people said mineral resources. And I think 1 other person said maybe it's strategic geographical location. And so I said, so we all agree that of a poll of 36 people, overwhelmingly 33 agree that the people are the greatest asset of the country. And so I brought out the budget of the then DPR and the CPC. And I said, whether it's oil mining license or prospecting or searching or speculating, all of them have been numbered from 1. And they're still numbered to, at this point, maybe 200 and something at that time. And so we have 200 and something wells, whether producing or not. And the regulator on behalf of Nigeria in that space was the then DPR. This is the number of people who work in DPR. This is the payroll budget for DPRs, multiple billions. Can't remember exactly what, multiple billions. And so we say the greatest asset is these 200 million people. And you've got only 241 people regulating or protecting that interest with a payroll of less than about $500 million naira. Doesn't that tell about how we are executing governance with respect to what our real priorities are? And so I think and so I was just part of the conversation, but the point I'm using this to make is that first you must literally figure out what the purpose is. And you might need to advocate amongst other stakeholders that, look, I'm not even asking for anything. I'm just asking that let's see this thing for what it is. And this is the type of conversation I had with the people in the agency also. And so I think that purpose clearly demonstrates, just clarifying the purpose allows you to figure out what the best approach to moving forward is. It was very clear from clarifying the purpose that the approach needed to be revolutionary and somewhat evolutionary, in the sense that you must you require immediate, strong, purposeful, determined, and even aggressive intervention.
Interesting.
And at the same time, you need transitional strategy.
Excellent.
For the evolutionary aspect of it. And that's how we approached the work.
Thank you, Tunde. So I took a note of a few things. Like I said, even though you worked in the public sector domain, a lot of lessons one could learn from this. For those of us in the private sector, one is vision, finding purpose, and like you said, purpose then drives strategy, which also then drives energy or your initiatives. You also talked about role clarification, understanding, essentially the mandate you have been given, so to speak. Stakeholder management, I think that's key as well. I think sometimes as innovators, we tend to neglect our stakeholders, but you did a good job of engaging with people in the State House, and not just in the State House, but in the CPC, as it was then called, and polling them, essentially also co-creating a new agenda or a new vision, so to speak, to drive the new direction of the organization. Now, I'm going to go to my second question, which I suspect a lot of people have joined this webinar because they wanted to hear about that. And that question is, what was your rationale for licensing digital lenders while at the FCCPC? In my opinion, I mean, there are several other sectors which are said to be exploitatory, like the betting shops and all that. I'm really curious to know why you decided to focus on digital lenders, given that I think we actually do a lot more good than harm when compared to the bet shops, who also have their own benefits and public good agenda, by the way, as well. So why did you decide to go into that sector of not just licensing, but somewhat regulating digital lenders across board?
Thank you. That's a good question. And so I'd start by saying that in the period while I was at the FCCPC, or even the CPC before I became the FCCPC, that's the only space where anybody is licensed by the FCCPC. There's absolutely no other space in the entire, value chain of commerce where you need a license or a registration of your business with the FCCPC. And it was deliberate. We didn't want to have anything to do with that. I personally didn't want to have anything to do with that. I never wanted to take a licensing fee from any business for any reason. I never wanted to be in a situation where I have said that this business is good, people can do business with it, because when it does something bad, it potentially questions or challenges your discretion or your judgment about the licensing process. And I agree that betting globally is one of the more contentious spaces. And when you're talking about, and it's an area where it's usually the most vulnerable in society that get caught under the bus. But what happened with digital lending is that we were seeing outcomes, especially post-COVID, and understandably so. COVID shut everything down, access to even small-time money. People need money to buy formula for their children, buy medication. And even sometimes people are in hospital, admitted, and you just don't have the access to, 5,000-6,000 naira to buy critical life-saving intervention. And what was coming out was that as people defaulted, the manners of recovering the debts were problematic. I certainly didn't think this was FCCPC space. I still don't, as a matter of fact, from a prudential regulation standpoint. But all my engagement across the board was that nobody was willing to own this. I spoke with the CBN at the time, and the CBN said, well, they're not the financial institutions we regulate. Sometimes people need just the money lending license. Spoke to Nick at the time. He said, well, we consider technology, but not the businesses themselves. And if you enter into that space, some of it is manual, it's not digital. So you couldn't, the states were doing their money lending licensing, and you can't get the states to regulate each of them because you have no power over state apparatus. What still was the fact that it was really, for the most part, digital. So it's a global market for all, regardless of what state the license was from. And while we were scratching our head and I was engaging and conducting advocacy on people to come in and rein this in, the problem was getting more and more, and it was becoming a runaway train. And one of the things for me, from a consumer protection standpoint, and certainly as a competition regulator, is that as much, protecting legitimate, ethical businesses is as much consumer protection as protecting consumers from illegitimate businesses. Because access to good products, great brands for consumers is actually part of protecting their rights. And so you owe an obligation. So this was my theory of harm and jurisdictional oversight. I owe an obligation to consumers to clean the space so that they can engage in the borrowing that they need, and for lenders who will lend in accordance with the law to lend. But because nobody was willing to own this, and so we started to think through how to regulate it. And what I did then was to set up a joint regulatory and enforcement task force that included the FCC, ICPC, CBN, NCC, NICTA, and that task force started to meet. We planned, and the FCCPC in particular designed enforcement strategies, which included even me going, out there gathering intel and conducting enforcement. And as we came through that, we saw that, look, the enforcement alone doesn't work. You need to have a framework for the landscape. And since nobody was going to own it, I proposed, and FCC pursued, what is still, as it were, sadly so, limited and interim regulatory framework. I'm very careful to choose the language limited and interim, meaning that hopefully this will transition into a more robust framework where the appropriate owners can own the aspects of it that are there. So, and as I speak to you right now, the two things we started looking at was, one, recovery, loan recovery strategies, data privacy violations, thirdly, truth in lending, if you will, transparency and full disclosures about what people were getting into. And then finally, interest regimes, compounding interest and all of that. Now, the fundamentals of lending, the FCCPC doesn't have neither the knowledge, the capacity, nor the skills. Ratios, interest calculations, they don't, and they still don't. But on these issues that could develop expertise, or at least had expertise, decide to get involved. And so we can determine interest rates. We can determine if you're compounding interest, as is charging interest on what is outstanding instead of just the principal. So those are the reasons. Now, how did we get to the point of saying we need to know who is who? We need to be able to find you. And we just, when people complain, we just need to be able to find you. We don't have any other regulator that we could go to get information about you. And secondly, as we worked and we saw that people could put their platforms on Google, Play Store and everything, we realized that we need to at least have a way to restrain those who want to perform unethically. Because in any case, it's even anti-competitive to hold some people responsible and not hold others responsible, and
True.
they have access to the same platform to do their business.
Absolutely.
So that's
So.
okay.
Thank you, Sule. So, if you look back, will you do this again? If so, are you really happy that you pioneered this initiative? And in your own perspective, what do you think has been the level of compliance and the impact of this interim or limited interim regulation on borrowers?
If I look back, the principle of having someone in that space to do what we're doing, absolutely. I don't think it should be a runaway train where nobody's checking. Absolutely. I mean, most of the lenders are the most vulnerable, most of the borrowers are the most vulnerable people in society. Now, are there things that I think should be done? Do I have any regrets about how we've done this? No, no, at all. It was very intense. It was difficult, but I think we got in there and did some things. Well, has it completely succeeded? I'll be the first to say that, there's still residues of what needs to change. And then would I do some things differently? Oh yeah, absolutely. But the one biggest thing that I would hope, if this would be done again, would be that there is a whole lot more consensus and collaboration because what that does is also it shows what society prioritizes. Regulatory overlap is actually an indication of what is important to society. I think we need to, I can only imagine how many ethical lenders will be succeeding now if we were able to really address the unethical lenders. And the fact that it was barely halfway. When I saw that we were the only ones in the space, I felt, look, you know what? At the end of the day, what is important is results. And so after the long, limited and interim regulatory framework and things were not moving, I was ready to move on anyway and own it. Because even the people that I expected would come in and take it over, all of them kept on looking and said, well, you're doing it. And, it's almost like you break it, you own it. So we had broken it, and now they were leaving it for the FCCPC. Until today, as far as I know, the FCCPC doesn't charge a dime for any of the work it does in that space. And it was by far the highest line item of spending in the entire period. Because I don't want to license lenders. I don't want to take money from anybody, even for what they've done wrong. I'd rather close you down than say, pay me a penalty and then you go back. So it's one of the highest spent areas. The allocation of resource while I was there, including manpower, was significant. We had a whole ad hoc team that became a standing team managing that space. Now, what I was moving on to, which I would have done, completed in the first quarter of this year, is the point I was trying to make about how it has ripple effects on every other thing. We're going to proceed to a truth in lending disclosure framework. We're going to proceed to a protection for ethical lenders. We're going to proceed to a compelling every data controller in the country to report credit. Whether you're a school, you're a landlord, you're a lender, you're a bank, you're a car service, report credit. Even businesses that don't pay their contractors within 30 or 90 days, let's just get everything. And we're going to write those regulations, compel people to report all of that, so that would be a more methodical approach. And we would have compelled even those who already had data to dump existing data, so that we could level the playing ground for everybody. Dump the existing data. We would have said to existing credit bureaus, these are the things you need. We would have worked with the NDPC to make sure that the protections for privacy and all of that. And so now, lenders would at least have a place. And the data that was already existing and that would have been dumped is perhaps some of the most important data of all these individuals and all of that. And so there would have been a basis. And so no lender would have even been able to get licensed or approved by the FCCPC or put on Google if you couldn't demonstrate that you already had a retainer or contract with one of the credible licensed credit bureaus. And so there would have been a better method to the madness of lending.
Interesting.
And so that's where things should go.
Thank you, Sule. So I know you already started speaking about this, but I'd like you to elaborate much more. Because I started off about the value of this initiative to the economy, or perhaps the market, or perhaps the people. Now, I'd like to ask you, you talked a bit about it, but I'd like you to elaborate about the benefits of having a strong consumer protecting culture in lending organizations.
So,
but I think most people see this as being a nuisance. They just want to get out of the way. And I'd like you to sell it, to us from a value perspective, so that people don't just see it as one of those check boxes they're just ticking off. So that it becomes something that they imbibe, that becomes part of the DNA of the average lender, whether you're digital or non-digital.
yeah, so the thing about it is, one thing is clear. I'm not too worried about a GT Bank or Access Bank or First Bank lending. I would be concerned about if there was a problem with it, but I'm not too worried about that, because most of those are big. I mean, when it's not consumer lending in that space, when it's a real big credit, you're talking about sophisticated players and who have all the commercial lawyers and everything to advocate and even fight for their rights and enforcement of their contractual terms. But consumer lending and then digital lending at the lower rung of the ladder could very easily, quickly become pure exploitation. Very easily and quickly so. Could become exploitation. The stories I heard about those naming and shaming and other loan recovery mechanisms, they're just heartbreaking and heart-rending. I mean it when I say people have literally died. It's not just social media stuff. Doing the work, I came into contact with families. I mean, you know how it is back home. As a story of someone from my own corner of the woods, a mother who received this information about her son. The woman died. And unintended consequences occur when there are abuses. And so the wisdom of showing interest and regulating that space is important. And then secondly, there are businesses that by their own values and culture will not do those things. There are businesses that don't set out intending to do it, but if it's the way of the space for them to stay ahead, they will adopt it. And then there will be the other businesses also that just won't. There are businesses that receive funding support from multilateral partners and other developmental partners who really want to help people and provide seed money, but have their own code of conduct that won't allow you to do some of these things. Those businesses can't survive unless somebody comes in and says others can't do it. And so there are so many reasons, both from protecting the industry and certainly protecting the consumers, where, I mean, I think the business case, the moral case, the justification for doing this is already, I mean, it's 100%.
Thank you, Tunde. So looking back, what will you consider as your greatest legacy now that you're out of the FCCPC? I mean, for one, never heard a lot about the CPC prior to your own time there. I think typically what I will hear of would have been just the appointment of a DG and, the exit of the DG, appointment of a new DG. There was really no visibility in terms of the activities of that organization. But I'd like you to, again, maybe from your perspective, point at one or two things that you're very proud of and that you would like to describe as your legacy. I mean, I also personally note that in recent times, I've seen probably the most thorough administrative notices from any organization in respect of what they're doing. I think there was an administrative notice of a potential fine on, is it Coca-Cola Nigeria or one of the soft drink bottling companies anyway. And recently there was one on a global top of the line communication firm as well. And I really enjoyed the thoroughness and detailed nature of those notices. I don't know if those fines of those notices were wrong or right, but what I enjoyed for one was the quality of the thoughts that will have gone into putting those pieces together. You don't typically get government agencies explaining to us in very detailed terms why they have taken a course of action. But perhaps there are other things you would like to highlight as your legacy, but I, for one, would count that as a big win, and the fact that it has been sustained post your departure from the FCCPC.
Thank you. So I'll bifurcate into the consumer protection and then the competition aspect. I think one of the things I'm proudest of, and I'll just say one or two or three, just like you said, because of one of the things I'm proudest of from the consumer protection standpoint is actually quite ironic and paradoxical, if you ask. You might say that, isn't that something to be ashamed of? But it's one of the things I'm proudest of, is the sheer number of complaints the agency receives. And when I assumed that role, the data showed that somewhere, and the data was even not credible, but it showed that somewhere between 600 and maybe 900 complaints were received in the 18 months prior to when I started. As of today, it's a good week when you don't get one, maybe two. I don't know about today, but as at the time I left, it was a good week if you didn't get 2, maybe even 3,000 complaints. And one might say, isn't that an indication? I mean, complaints, isn't that an indication of failure or at least lack of dissatisfaction? It is. But that dissatisfaction is not with the agencies, but the products. And so for me, I think just enabling consumers to find their voices and the orientation that, you know what, those who sell things to me actually owe me an obligation, and I can demand, and where they don't respond, I can insist, and where they still don't respond, I can seek to enforce. I think that growing culture, I mean, just imagine how completely, and you look at me, completely intense the discussion about whether things are going right, food prices, quality, the fact that the quantity is changing, packaging is remaining. None of these things started happening in the past decade. They've always happened. But now, all of a sudden, and you know, the human spirit gets used to something and starts demanding more. That's good. That's good. So for me, I think that's an important legacy that creates a lot of work for those who succeed, but that's okay. And the consumer protection side, just being able to, one of my greatest campaigns was a campaign that I, Christian, demand and insist. Demand on your rights. When it's not respected, insist. And when they're still not respected, report. Coming from many years of military rule and oppression, and I found out that companies themselves felt, what the heck, where's all this problem coming from? But the sheer number of times people tell me that companies will say, this lunatic, Irukera across the road, let's just sort this out. People would say to me that they have a problem with a service provider, a company, they bought something, it's not working. And when they say, you know what, I'll call FCCPC, they say, all right, let's sort it out. I've had repeated stories of people said they wrote a complaint to the company and copied Babatunde Irukera, FCCPC, and all, without even delivering their copy. The companies reach out to them and say, let's sort this out quickly. I think that's important for businesses or people or society to just know that, you know, there's an accountability framework that can hold you accountable. And there's a consequence management system that makes it consequential when you do something wrong. So that for me is very important. The other one is an internal compliance culture within companies that is beginning to take better root, with companies knowing that, look, someone can ultimately come and that the bastard is just like a bull in a China store. He would speak up, he would speak out. You would find him on Twitter, and, you know, in the morning after he's investigated us, you'd wear his wig and gown and go to court by himself to prosecute and all of that. All those things put together, and companies, we don't want that. And finally, to the point you made, I used to write all the releases myself. I mean, because I'm a lawyer, and I know that what we're doing is very serious and sensitive. When you put something out, the language is extremely important. The content is extremely important. You cannot prejudice the work. You cannot damage businesses. You cannot make statements where you yourself become a defendant and apologizing for the things you said. So I wrote those things myself, and I still support the agency with some of that. And so you're right. But even more so is the investigative reports. Our investigations are very long drawn, many times, some are short, but I insist on a full investigation every time. And we release the report. The bottling situation, that was an investigation that concluded while I was there. It was about multiple years of investigation. And the report is out there on the internet, by the way. And the one against a big tech, so 100 and something, maybe 120-page investigative report that I literally went through word for word, page by page, because that also concluded. And what that has done, both the statements and concluding these investigations and issuing the reports, is it promotes transparency and accountability. Businesses don't want that negative connotation that comes with being investigated and it being published. But I found that in my time, even when companies are found to have done something wrong, they're more than willing for a preemptive resolution or corrective conduct. But I think that, that's not enough to change behavior. And it's not enough to prevent others from engaging in that type of behavior. And someone was saying to me that there is nowhere in the history of Nigeria have we had a regulator. I mean, look at the sheer number of businesses and regulators in Nigeria. Interactions are going on a daily basis. So it's not that people are not doing something, but that there's nowhere in the history of the country where we've had this kind of deep investigations and a regulator who's confident enough to release the outcome of their investigation because they've not been compromised and because they believe it's defensible. And so I think it's shaping culture, both in industry and on the regulatory side. So those are the things that I think have contributed to the system.
Excellent, Sule. So I know you spoke about a culture of consequence management and accountability from both the public and private sector, and how sometimes people who would have issues or complaints against companies would literally get them to do what they need to do by just copying you on their communications to those sort of companies. Now, I'll tell you an interesting thing. I was a beneficiary of dropping your name. So I made a down payment on a real estate investment, and a couple of weeks after I'd made my payment, I didn't get an allocation letter. And so I went to them and look, I paid you guys, where's my allocation letter? It took a number of back and forth before they finally told me that the type of unit I had, I had paid for, was no longer available. And so they wanted me to make a choice in another estate. And I refused. I asked for my money. And when I didn't get my money, all I had to do was say, I'm going to report you to FCCPC. And I got my money back and put my money in another estate. And yeah, I've been living in that house now for the last 3 years. So I probably would not, and I'm actually speaking from that house, which I eventually invested in. So I probably will not have the benefit of doing this, if not for your good work. So shameless plug, I dropped your name and I got my money. And I have my house now, thanks to the good work you did at the FCCPC. So thank you for that. And I'm sure there are lots of people like that who can testify. I didn't copy you, but I did threaten that I would report them if they did not pay me after 1 month. I think exactly 1 month from the date I gave them, they actually made the payment. So I'm thankful to you personally, and on behalf of other Nigerians who benefited from the good work you did while at the FCCPC. And I hope and believe that the legacy you built will be sustained by the new executive vice chairman. Now, to my final question, I know you had a brief it's more of a double-barrel question. I know you had a brief foray into politics of Kogi State. Post-exit from FCPC, what are you up to nowadays? And are you looking back into contesting for, is it senator or governor of Kogi State or any other elective position?
Oh, well, since I left office, the first thing I did was rest. I rested quite a bit. Now I'm enjoying being a veteran and maybe not in age, but certainly a senior service citizen. I consider myself a senior citizen from the point of serving, in the sense that at least I've done that. I'm still consulted almost on a daily, in fact, literally on a daily basis by other agencies on change management and how to push through intense change in a very short while. As a matter of fact, I just spoke for NFIU 2 days ago, and one of the questions there was somebody said, in one cycle of administration, you were able to take an agency from an agency that was supported by the government with ₦1 billion in both salary and capex and opex, and you took that agency out of the budget to become self-sustaining. And instead of taking ₦1 billion from the government, reports have it that at the end of last year, you gave the same government over 30 billion naira, and that you moved payroll for those 200 and something people from a total of 560 million per annum to about 2.5 billion naira per annum, by increasing their salaries and making them more efficient. So how do you do that in just one cycle? And so yes, I'm enjoying sharing my experiences and even some of my regrets with others. I think that's beneficial, and one of the most important reasons why God gives us experiences is not just so that we know things, it's also so that others can benefit from it, correct? And so it's not, in or out of office, you've got something to contribute. That's one. And secondly, I'm advising and off to Boston, to Harvard, to be in residence and speaking with some of the people on developing regulatory frameworks in Africa and competition. And I'm advising COMESA, which is the Common Markets of Southern Africa, which has, I think, 21 or 23 countries on competition regulation, and advising the Arab League. So finding the time to do some of the things I like and trying to write a book.
Interesting.
As far as the politics
about politics?
So for me, at the time, what we saw was a value proposition and opportunity to serve in that capacity. I'm absolutely not thinking of running for office at this time. I'm not.
Never say never.
And I'm not considering it exactly. I'm not thinking about it. I am not considering it. But if in the future it presents itself as an opportunity to again provide, just engage in serving, I just might. But I'd say the window is fast closing, because I don't intend to be doing this or any such thing when I'm in my 60s or 70s, whether elected office or appointed office.
Interesting. Thank you so much, Sule. Thank you for your time on this webinar. You're still going to stay on, but I'd also like the opportunity to thank you for your service while you were in public sector as executive vice chairman of FCCPC. I think we're all better off as a country, and I'm glad in some sort of way that you're also reaping the value of your diligence and hard work and meritocratic service at the FCPC. You mentioned a string of consulting opportunities which you are now benefiting from, and I'm sure you get paid well. And even though I know some of them might also be pro bono as well. Yeah, I think that's it. I'll hand over to Grace now to moderate the question and answer session. Grace, over to you. But once again, thank you so much, Tunde, for your time. It's good to connect with you. This has been a masterclass, not just about ethical lending, but also about change management, stakeholder management. I would also say co-creation of policies and agenda and the like. So thank you once again for your time and yeah, for your service and your good work.
Thank you. Thank you, Yomi. Thank you so much, Mr. Irukera. So we have a couple of questions from the audience here for you, directed at you, and I will just take the first one. I follow you on LinkedIn and have a question. Will you say you were able to clean the streets with the licensing of digital money lenders? That is, remove all the unethical lenders. That's the first question to you.
Would I say we were able to clean the streets? To the extent that cleaning the street constitutes removal, yes. To the extent that cleaning the streets means eliminating all, no. But I would say that just measuring, if you could be a thermostat for what it had become, just look by you just looking at your phone and the sheer number of messages you were receiving over a period of time. Based on the interventions of the FCCPC, you would have seen that started coming down. And there's really no space where at one point you're going to have 100% elimination. But you must, what the regulatory system must do for it to be effective is to continue the work of reducing and ensure you don't get back to a point where things begin to rise up again. But I would say that there was still a lot to do to clean that space up. But that doesn't discount the fact that a lot has been done to clean that space up.
Okay, thank you so much. And back to that particular aspect of the reduced SMS, yes, it has. Because I can still remember you're just randomly sitting down and someone is sending you a WhatsApp message, XYZ with fraudster stamp on the person's name, has taken a loan. And then you're trying to understand, who is this person? I don't even know this person. How did you get my number and all of that? You're running through your contacts. Maybe one mechanic that helped you fix your car a couple of years back has gone to take one loan, and that's how they've been able to get their contact, and now they're not contacting me. Please stop contacting me, and they're still hammering at it and all of that. So thank you so much for that answer. I'm going to take the next one. Hi, it's Sam. Is there any regulatory point of view to underwriting? I'm generally curious about how underwriting works and if there are checks and best practices for how to go about it from a regulatory perspective.
And so for underwriting, I doubt that we have an underwriter's platform or framework of its own. But the Insurance Commission certainly regulates the scope of underwriting and the nature of underwriting and reinsurance and the actuarians and also. So yes, NICOM would be a good starting point to make these inquiries.
Okay, thank you. And then we have just one final question before we let you go. During your time at the FCCPC, while you tried your best to help with protecting Nigerians from loan sharks, unfortunately, this also created a significant burden for lenders, and many small-time lenders couldn't cope and close shop. What do you think you could have done better?
I recognize that, yes, that heavy, I don't want to say high-handed, but heavy handed regulation can constitute an obstacle to small businesses. But we needed to intervene as strongly as we did because of what a problem was. And one of the things that I kept in mind, which was because of the ethical and some many times the small businesses, was the whole approach of not charging any fees for anything at all. And it was a lot of work we did. And there's still a lot to even analyzing, but we made sure we weren't charging any fees. So it didn't impose a new financial burden on businesses. And in any case, the cost of that financial burden goes to the consumers one way or the other. The second thing was the fact that we also made the limited and interim regulations quite simple, in the sense that it didn't seek to go into your business as such. Just show that you have a complaint resolution mechanism. Let's know where we can find you. Show us that you have a policy and that you have an understanding either for your employees or your subcontractors who do your loan recovery for you. And you have a system, a quality control system to check when things go wrong. And you have a remedial and disciplinary system when things do really go wrong. And so those were the things we did. And I know that those things can affect small businesses who are ethical, but they also constitute an opportunity for small businesses to institutionalize and strengthen. And so it could be difficult early in the day, but it's also the way to create an enduring business. However, the new additional regulations and initiatives and efforts that I had planned to occur between January and April 2024 would certainly have leveled the field a little more for small businesses. For instance, they would have had access to data that would have given them a fair bite, and not the ones who have the 10, 20,000 downloads who were keeping the data to themselves. Democratizing data and standardizing the parameters of lending would certainly have made it fairer for small businesses to compete.
Okay. We still have a couple of questions. So sorry. I see some of the audiences are just picking up and dropping down, but this is the last question that we have here. Can you kindly tell us the process which was put in place to investigate the activities of WhatsApp, given the recent fine that was handed to them earlier this year?
No, that's quite a question. I mean, you're talking about an investigation that started in 2021, and it went through many phases. First thing is, for me as chief executive, a justification for it, the theory of harm. And so we analyzed that internally. And then when I'm satisfied, I approve for an investigation to proceed. And then you engage. And so usually investigations proceed either by the notice of commencement of investigation or an order to show cause or other instruments. There's a way for that to go. And so essentially what it was that the FCCPC monitored a privacy policy that was changed and started in 2021. And many consumers were complaining on the internet and everywhere that this new privacy policy and WhatsApp's approach of take it or leave it, the policy said accept, or if you don't accept by a date certain, your account will be closed. And so we analyzed that, we looked at it, and saw that that was the case, and then reached out and come and said, show us why this is the case and why there shouldn't be a consequence for that. And so that opened the investigation, and for the next few years, all kinds of things, requests for information, analysis of the information, collaboration with NIPTA, Data Protection Commission, the German authorities, the US authorities, other countries, other African countries, analyzing, exchanging information, looking at other cases, presenting the findings to the meta parties, including WhatsApp, engaging their lawyers, their responses and everything, analyzing all of that, and then finally making a decision. And none of the decision was arbitrary. Even the determination of the monetary penalty, there are regulations and there are things you look at.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I have one more question.
Go ahead.
I'm not sounding like that person that always has one more question after the last question, but this one is going to go to Yomi. My question is for Yomi. I would like you to tell us your story of being a doctor and now a lender. Any ethical challenges and how do you overcome them? And why?
I second that question. I was going to ask it myself.
So you know, the interesting is that I don't see myself as a lender. I see myself as I run a social enterprise, and lending for us is just a wedge to transform the healthcare sector. We're very focused on the healthcare sector, and perhaps I would say the social and impact sector. We might do other things aside from healthcare, but we're essentially using loans to transform the capabilities of healthcare SMEs to deliver better and improve patient care. So the challenging thing, especially in my sector, that's my sector, but maybe by way of background. So yeah, I qualified as a doctor, but to be honest, I only practiced for 3 years, and I've qualified for about 21 years ago, or maybe going to 22 now. I've worked mostly in management, finance, and technology. So yeah, I set up a company called Tillit 7 years ago, and it had 3 objectives: advisory or business units, so you can call it objectives or business units, advisory, project management, and financing or investments. I had done like advisory and project management for 6 years. And last year I decided it was time to start the financing arm, because again, you can give advice to people, but if they don't have access to the financing to transform their business, it's challenging. The status quo just remains. And I saw there was a gap in that sector. And so I started Patient Finance, of course, with support from your team. We were able to get off in, I think, 12 weeks from the point that I decided it was time to go. And probably at 1% of the costs would have taken me if I wanted to do it on my own. So for me, I don't see myself as a lender. Lending is a wedge we use to transform society and to do a lot of good. At the moment, we're focused on healthcare SMEs. Tomorrow we might move to education, we might move to water, sanitation, but in everything we'll do, it's going to revolve around what I call the impact segment, so to speak. So it's credit for good. We think by providing, or we know not just by thinking. If you go to our YouTube, Patient Finance, it's called Patient, but spelled Paycient. It's a play on the word patient. It's called Patient Finance, that has spelled it out. We're on YouTube. You see a couple of testimonials from some of our customers, and they speak to the value that we bring to them. We try not to charge them, or first of all, I make sure that the cost of our capital is as low as possible, so that I can pass on as low rates as possible to my healthcare SMEs that we support. We take pleasure and delight in supporting them, because we've seen the value that they're able to achieve because they have financing. Imagine you go to your favorite pharmacy and there's a stock out simply because they don't have enough working capital or financing to buy inventory. So we're there to make sure that they have the money they need to be able to stock up, pay their staff on time, and also buy medical assets. I mean, we started just, I think 11 months ago. At the end of this month, we'll make it 1 year, but I think we've done a lot of good. And yeah, I also see us as a platform. So we also collaborate with commercial banks to, of course, provide financing to those who are not able to cover. The largest loan we give is single obligor, is a maximum of 500K, but we also give as little as 120,000 naira. We started off with 500K to 5 million, but quickly realized that there were women, especially those ones that you call chemists, who need just 100 or 200,000 naira. Sometimes, just to stock up. And so we created a new product for to them. And at the moment, I think that product has 90% uptake by women. Our general portfolio is 50-50 or thereabout, perhaps 51% in favor of women. So yeah, I don't see myself as a lender. I try to play by the rules, so to speak, because I was brought up that way, so to speak. I've had a history of working in big corporates, and when you work for big corporates, so you can say I've done my apprenticeship, I paid my dues. When you work for big corporates, you understand the value of data privacy, understand the value of compliance, whether it's tax or regulatory compliance in general. So we try to be as ethical as possible internally with our staff, with our customers, and of course with our investors as well. So I hope that sort of is an appropriate response to your reply. And I prefer you just call me Yomi and not as a doctor, because then, I start feeling guilty of the fact that my parents sent me to school to train as a doctor. Now I'm giving out loans and the like. Yeah.
Okay, no problem. Thank you so much. I'm super grateful for having both of you here, and we were able to learn a whole lot. I'm going to close the curtain here because we always keep to time as usual. Thank you for everyone.